Alright, it is time again for another day of Odinmade Hero, the live stream where I follow Handmade Hero by Casey Muratori one day at a time until I eventually, hopefully, learn how to make a game on my own. And so yesterday, and by the way, I'm doing it in the Odin programming language. I always feel like I have to qualify that, even though it should be obvious. If you come to this stream, you kind of know what you're getting into implicitly just based off the name. But anyways, yesterday's stream kind of ended off in short order. It was cut short because I had to go figure out what was going on with my son. He had a little accident before his nap that didn't seem like a big deal, and then after he woke up, it turns out this boo-boo he had gotten was really bothering him. But it wasn't anything serious. It was just, I was trying to figure out, I was in here, I was streaming, and I was distracted, and I could feel that I was like not able to program at my best because I could hear he was so upset about something, and then turned out, it wasn't a big deal, but he felt like it was a big deal. So a few treats later, and he was back to his regular, happy, giggling self. So that's good. But on the other hand, there was a lot of code left in yesterday's day of Handmade Hero that I had to work through, but we got through all of the new code, really, that needed to be written during that time, so I didn't feel too bad about it. Pretty much everything that was left in yesterday's episode was a lot of debugging stuff, and I had quite a few little nasty bugs of my own, one of which was kind of difficult to track down, even though it wound up being incredibly simple. It was just a dumb sort of copy-paste error, or not really a copy-paste error, but I just wasn't paying attention where I should have. And, it's tough. It's tough to do because I'm trying to get through each day as fast as I can so that I can, actually keep these streams to a relatively succinct length. I was originally hoping I could keep them to about an hour, and that became very obviously impossible to do. So 2 hours seems to be the good kind of benchmark that I've been able to set, where about half an hour of code of translating Casey's code takes me about an hour, depending on what else is going on, what other topics come up during the stream that I feel like rambling on about. So anyways, I'll try and get through everything that happened in the back half of yesterday's episode, and then we can move on ahead into today's, which is going to be adding some new entity types, which will be fun, and hopefully it'll kind of move us out of this really, it's not exactly boring, it's a very abstract and heady thing to try and figure out, and you don't get a whole lot of visual feedback, which I think, if I think about it, is why I'm interested in graphics programming, because to get that visual feedback of whether or not you're doing the thing that you want to do and be able to see that is really rewarding. But with stuff like this, it's kind of like, well, is there an entity showing up on the screen when it should or shouldn't, and are its position are its coordinates being read back correctly or not? It's not super rewarding in that way, but once it's actually working the way it should be, then that is rewarding. So anyways, I was going on about, so we wrote this change entity location procedure earlier in the week, and I was going on about this to-do that I eventually added, which essentially says, when we are pulling an entity out of its old block, which is what we should be doing here, right? Shouldn't we be worried about essentially overwriting the index in this entity block with the same exact entity index that we're trying to pull out? And so I actually wrote an assertion to cover this, to see, well, if it ever pops up, then this assertion will catch it and we can try and figure out why. And it actually happens immediately as soon as we try and drop a player in, because the player's old position, well, let me think about this before I just start saying nonsense. Yeah, so the player's old position in this block, its low entity index, actually, it tries to override it right away. And I think that's because it doesn't have an old position at first, right? Which kind of makes sense when you think about it. Like when we first add the player, it never had an old position to begin with. Or actually, no, it does have an old position. So now I've already got myself confused. But the point is that this assert actually trips right away. And the long story short, you know, after thinking through this through way too much, and clearly it didn't, the lesson didn't stick too well in trying to like reason about how we get here. But basically, the reason why that shouldn't happen, or the reason why that should be caught, is that the initial case in this branch here should check to see if the old and new position are in the same chunk. Because if they are, then you would never get in here, and then this would never happen, right? If that was the case. If this case is working properly, then we never need to worry about this, right? And so that was the thing that was not clear to me at the time when I wrote that. So I just don't think we need to care about that. But it doesn't. If that's the case, then this assert shouldn't be tripping, right? So that does mean that there is a bug in there. Is the first takeaway. And so why is that? You know, I wanted to understand that before jumping on the stream today. And I have a general idea of where the bug is, but I'm not positive. And because Casey's going to continue to make changes to this code, I didn't think it was worth it to really sit there and try and diagnose it. Because for all I know, his code has the same bug. And I think it would, just because, you know, everything else looks just about the same. But we'll get to that in a little bit here. So if I remove that assert, right, and then I had this print statement that basically articulates the issue, right? Which is that we're pulling the entity out of its old location, but let's see. Oh, of course, that print statement is gone. I have a bunch of print statements in here to help me stay on track, but I guess I forgot to uncomment or comment some of them out because we're not quite there yet. Yeah, so that print statement, if I can do this properly without making those logs go away. What the heck? Why is this happening? Just let me do the thing that I want to do. Okay, so you can see here all these print statements that I have are saying, you know, the entity changes their location, in quotes, but they never actually moved out of that block. That's what that case was, and that's what I was like looking at it, trying to figure out why, you know, that wouldn't be an issue the way Casey had written it, because he didn't write any code to handle it. That's because this code is supposed to handle it right there. But if that code is supposed to handle it, then this shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't be hitting that assert that I had there a second ago, and this print message, which is saying, you know, the player is continually being pulled out of that old entity block, right? And then down here, they are being written to the new one, you know, wherever is appropriate, wherever the, you know, the logic of the program deems it's appropriate based on how this has all been written so far. And so that kind of tells you that, well, first of all, it would make you wonder if there's something wrong with this code. And it's really so simple that it can't be the case. I mean, it's just comparing the chunk coordinates across the board. It means that these positions are just different, right? So before we get into this call, something is going wrong. And that's happening in here, I'm pretty sure. Map into chunk space, right? And I have good reason to believe that's the case, because when we print this out, if we uncomment this out now, of course I've got to go in here and remove this import. If I go in here and run it again, then we see that the old position and the new position's chunk X coordinates are flipping every single loop when the move player code is called. And that shouldn't be happening, right? Because the player isn't moving. Like, we just spawn in and then we sit there, and somehow the chunk X coordinate is changing on every single loop. And that's pretty weird. That doesn't seem like it should be happening, right? And it only stops happening, I'm pretty sure, if I start moving around here. if I'm not mistaken. I have to like go onto a different chunk, right? So yeah, there you go. Now you can see that the chunk X, if I'm standing still like I was before I closed the game, the chunk X is never changing like it should be. You know, it should not be changing every single loop on every single iteration of the game loop if we're just standing still, right? Like that seems pretty self-explanatory. So there's something about this code where it goes to do the recanonicalization of the coordinates, right? Specifically the X. That when we jump in here, you know, we have these to-dos here. And this one, I think, may be specifically the problem, where the way that we're doing this round and everything, it's like taking us on and off that chunk X initially because of everything being zeroed out or something. Like, however, I'd have to set through this and look at the math that's happening at each step of the way. And then also over here, you know, we've messed with this a bunch of times now, and Casey has gone back and forth on like the reasoning, not the reasoning, but he's just changed it. Like at one point this was inclusive, and at other points it hasn't been, and at other points, you know, this number here was looking something more like this or something like that. And so I've always been a little bit shaky on why that code looks the way it does. Like I can conceptually understand what it's there for, but I do think that this has something to do with it. So anyways, all that being said, I think the key takeaway there is just that I know that there's an issue there, and that if for some reason we don't solve it over the course of moving through the series, then it'll be something to come back to and look at and try and really understand why that's happening, because that should not be happening, right? And so that, I think, is that. Go ahead and get rid of that. And so the other thing, we go back into the world file here. Do I have any? I don't have any other hanging print statements laying around, it looks like. If we go back over here, I think that might have been it actually for this procedure call. So all we know basically is that when we start, right, this is not working properly, but once the player has actually moved across chunks, then this code starts working the way it's supposed to. But it doesn't actually fail, right? Like the program doesn't crash because it just overwrites it in that block, and then down here, let's see. Yeah, overwrites it in this block, taking it. It's weird because it's overwriting it in the same block that it's already in, and then it does the same thing down here, basically, right? Is effectively what's going on. So this does nothing, right, when it keeps on pulling the entity out of its old chunk and not doing anything with it. That code, just none of this should be underneath this L should be operating, right, because the player is still in the same chunk. But again, those positionings coming in there are saying something else. So this code seems fine to me, is really all I'm trying to say. But we had some other issues. The main one is that, you know, as you may or may not have seen already, the rooms that we had set up are not happening. We just have this straight diagonal going up, and then I think maybe if we just keep on walking, we'll find more of those. The wall should be forming a rectangle room for us to run around in, right? And that was just, I think, let's see if I go into, wait, I'm already here. Close it. It's like in the add wall call. When we're setting the add, or when we're adding a wall and we're setting its coordinates, this is just, I copied and pasted this abstyle_x stuff, and then did not change to actually put in the y and z values. So I think that gets us our rooms back mostly. So there you go. Just a simple case of, like, whenever I see something like that, like a diagonal going up and away, it kind of informs that there's something going on with the same coordinate being plugged in for multiple planes, which you obviously don't want to be doing that. So That was straightforward enough. The more difficult issue, I think, was actually back here in the world file. Yeah, I was so fixated on whether or not to pass in an allocator into this get world chunk procedure that I didn't notice that I had messed up this case here, and this took me a while to figure out, which hurt. But you're supposed to check whether or not the chunk X coordinate is set to uninitialized off of the chunk that we're currently on in this loop. And if I'm checking this, that means we're only ever checking against the chunk X that was passed into the procedure. So that was just dumb. I don't know how that happened. You know, just not paying attention, being careless. So I think that kind of fixes our rooms so that they're actually complete. And there you go. Now they're all filled in to every corner. So that's good. And what else? I think there was a couple other things that happened that were straightforward enough at the end of yesterday's episode. And the reason why I was able to finally actually catch this before I move on was I was seeing this value come back in the chunk X for some of these tile chunks, or world chunks rather. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why are we getting the world chunk uninitialized value set and seeing that come back in here, right? And so that got tangled up with this other issue with the old and new positions not lining up. So there's just a lot of moving parts to all of this, and it's hard to unpack it all and know, like, when you see an issue, where is that issue actually coming from? But that's what led me to seeing that and finally noticing that that was a mistake. Because basically, right, if we just had it like this, then we're setting this to be, well, basically this would never, this conditional would never enter. We would never get into this branch because we're never passing in a chunk X. Sorry, that's not true. We get in here because the chunk X never equals this, right? But when we were coming down in here, yeah, so we set it in here. We set that uninitialized value. So I was getting that 2 billion chunk X value out further down the pipe. But this wouldn't. This would, we would enter this conditional because we're setting it. Yeah, I don't know. Now I'm getting confused. It's weird because we only set it in here, but how could we ever get that to be set? Yeah, no, we do get in there and we do set the world chunk uninitialized value because it never would be. It's just the whole way he had to write this out. You could tell he was like, as he was figuring it out, I think he made a comment about how nasty it is to have to think through the way the code goes about doing this. And as you can see, I'm still struggling to put it all together. But so it gets set here. Yeah, you would think that at this point, because this value would be set, then we would override it with the proper chunk X value. Somehow, the whole point of this, just to make a long story short and to not confuse myself further, is that this was being set and somehow it was never getting overridden to the proper value, or it would at first, but then it would get overwritten. And so that was just making things that much more confusing. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to have like the perfect understanding of why I'm seeing some of what I'm seeing because there's so many moving pieces to all of this. But I think the more I just kind of step through it, and a big part of this, I think, I was feeling this pain yesterday and pretty much all week while writing this stuff out. And now I think it probably would serve me to spend some time and get a debugger together, because then I could actually step through it and see these values come into play as the program executes, and then that would probably clarify some of this stuff for me. But yeah, so anyway, let's just move past that. We'll come back around to that and talk more about it if need be. Let's see. Yeah, so what was the other thing? Oh, so the other things that came up were that Casey started loading in these some of these other assets that we added yesterday. And then I think down here, over here, instead of drawing that backdrop, we just start filling the background of the game with gray. And then we also down here started loading in those trees after we loaded it in when we initialized the game. So we can just turn that off, uncomment that, and I think at this point we are ready to go. Can I still jump? I can. So nothing seems broken. We're exactly where we need to be to kick off the next day. Certainly not without a bit of pain. It really doesn't feel good to have a complete understanding of why some of the values that I was getting out of that entity and tile chunk, spatial partitioning code, all of that stuff working together. I still don't have it completely down, but I at least understood it well enough to kind of see where one problem is surfacing. And I was also able to just, get it to a working state now. So that's good. And that might actually be it. Oh yeah, I meant to, well, is that right? Yeah, that's just a spacing issue. So we got rid of that to do. We got rid of that old commented out param. I think we're good. So, man, probably the most painful day yet. And I think it's just because, usually when we wrap up a day, we have it in a working order. And so we can kind of track. We're not doing too big of a change all at once to where it's so complicated that we can't verify that we're still in a semi-working state. Whereas this time, I don't think we had the game working since maybe Monday. And I say working insofar as like we just had, this where we can walk around our little tile map room, which is now just like a tree prison, I guess. Can't really escape it. You can walk around in it, but there just isn't a whole lot. You can walk through it and contemplate all the poor choices you've made. So that's that. We can go ahead and jump into day 59, where we're going to add a little familiar entity type. So that'll be fun.
Start recording. Hello everyone and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on Twitch with no libraries, no engine, no nothing really, just our own code. And we are right in the middle of doing our sort of engine design work. We are designing our own engine here. We kind of have some of the parts that we need spec'd out so far, kind of prototype in place, but we haven't really tackled some of the entity stuff that we need to get sorted out before we start working on things like the renderer or the animation system. And so what I want to do is today I'm kind of going to go through and start to play with entities a little bit. We don't have anything specific in mind, but we just want to kind of start playing with them and see what sorts of stuff we need in the entities to make them work properly and to allow us to build worlds the way that we want to build them, and just try to get a feel for what's going to be required, because that'll kind of inform our design decisions as we go forward and let us know what the engine actually needs to do in terms of supporting the stuff that we're going to want. And so we're just going to start playing around with that, and we'll see where it goes. I suspect this will take us several days because we'll want to build lots of different sort of example test sort of things in here, and we kind of have to see how each of them plays out before we can really start to make decisions about what we want the engine to do for us. Because we just do one or two different types of entities, we'll probably miss some things that are important to some other types of entities that work different ways and that sort of stuff. In addition, kind of all wrapped up in this, we also kind of have one other small decision to make, which is if everything is an entity or if there's going to be other things that are not quite full status citizens, like that aren't all the way entities. and that sort of stuff. Like, you know, do we want the grasses and the rocks on the ground to be entities, or is it too expensive to store those entities, and are we going to need some sort of intermediate representation for those guys that's halfway, you know, sort of lesser than an entity, if you will. So that's what we're going to do today. If you have pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org using the pre-order button, then you should have gotten a link in your email which has basically a download page. That download page allows you to download the source code, and that source code consists of a series of zip files. What you want to do is you want to grab a day 58 zip file, because here on day 59, that's the source code that we are starting from. So grab day 58 zip file, unzip it to a directory, and you'll be exactly where I am right now. And where am I right now is always the first question of the day. And where am I right now is we had just finished our spatial partition for entities. We had thrown some trees in there, and of course we are not actually sorting our entities yet, so we get some sort of nonsensical results, which is like, obviously intuitively this tree should occlude, you know, the player, but it doesn't. Similarly, like there's places where the player looks like he should be occluded, so he should occlude a tree but doesn't, like right there, right? And that's really a rendering thing, so I'm not sure if I actually care about that too much, but we might want to address that again as well sometime soon, which is basically just a sort of our entities in terms of what order they should be drawn in, just to fix that. So I don't know, that's kind of on the table as something that may happen when I get too annoyed with it. We know what needs to be done, it's not a big deal, but just when we do it, if it starts to make me too grumpy, then that's, you know, it's gotta be fixed before I can go do things that might be more important to do at any given time. Okay. So I guess some things just to start with, just really some basic stuff. What I'd like to do is just start playing with dropping some more entities in here. Maybe what I'll do, trying to think of what the smartest way to approach it is. Maybe what I'll do is like write some simple things like just put in another entity, another copy of the player, for example, who just kind of follows the player around. So you know when the player goes somewhere, that other entity will follow the player around. Because that's going to be a reasonable amount of code. That may take us several days to do actually, to work out exactly how we want to store stuff like that. Because, for example, we may find that we want to do like pathfinder or something. Like we may want to do something like when I come up around here, you know, and the entity is over here, we may want him to be smart enough to like find this opening in the trees and walk through it, as opposed to just like bumping into the trees stupidly or something like this, right? So that's a good example of that. And similarly, with that same code, at the same time, I'll probably bring up some kind of monster, so something that like attacks the player, for example, and maybe give the player like a hit animation, like not a hit animation, but like a hit key, so he can swipe, you know, at the monster, and we'll just try to get something like that going. So we'll have you know, the player, a familiar, a monster, and the ability for them to interact in some way. And that'll kind of allow me to sort of start to see what I want in terms of systems that will allow me to construct those things without having to worry a super lot about what's going on, right? Without having to worry about like the integration effort or whatever that's required in it. So let's think about this. Let's think about how we want to do this. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and load up the editor here. Like I said, this should be relatively complicated because I'm imagining that we want something, once we start to actually want real features, like the things not to be totally stupid, it's gonna get relatively complicated. Okay. So I guess what I'd like to do now is I'd like to say that you know, we're gonna put down maybe a monster in that first room, let's say, just as a test. I'll put down you know, the monster and the familiar. We'll both go in that first room. So what we could use the new camera position, right? We could use that new camera position as a way of figuring out where those guys should go. And then I also obviously already have in here sort of, we had a very simple concept of what an entity was, right? We had heroes and we had walls. That's all we had so far. But I could go ahead in here and add an entity type that's just our test familiar, right? And I could add another entity type that was like our test monster, right? That would be pretty reasonable to do. And now, if I want to, I can go ahead and add as low entity types, right? I can go ahead and add those in using our add low entity function. So if I want to, I could make a function here that adds one of these guys. So if I add a monster, right, I can go ahead and do that. And the monster, I guess, will just continue the sort of the trend that we had been doing, where I take tile locations, right, and we add things at those tile locations, because that seems, you know, as good as anything at this point. When we start to get more into like how we want to build the world, we may change that, but for now it seems totally fine. So all I got to do here is, I guess, do exactly what I was doing, where I get out the entity stuff. What I'm wondering here is if this can't be collapsed a little bit. Like I might as well just get the low entity directly after I do it. Do any people typically use the entity index? I guess they do sometimes. They kind of need to know that. I wonder if add low entity though should just return both. I guess what I'm thinking is add low entity maybe should just have a low entity, you know, something like this, new low entity, right, or something like that, and it just has, or I guess I could call it add low entity result, a little more consistent naming with what we had before, and that'll just have whatever its index was, its low index, and also its pointer, so the entity low, right? Or maybe I'll just call that low. So I could do something like that. Maybe that makes a little bit more sense to me, because then I can put this in here, and that way when you call this, it's just a little more convenient, right? So the result, right, is going to start out, I guess let's see here, the entity index, we're always asserting that it's actually valid, so to some degree that's relatively straightforward. I guess I could even do it down here. So I could say the result.low equals entity low, right? And let's see here. I'm kind of feeling cramped with my typing. There we go. And then my result.low index is going to be entity index. So if I go ahead and return that instead, now all of these people who get both things can just do it in one go, and they don't have to constantly be doing all this nonsense. And so we could just do it this way, I suppose. Oops, just do it this way, where we do that.
I'm trailing behind here, so I got to get caught up. So we started working on this add familiar, and well, I don't think he added the add familiar call yet, but he added the add monster. I know we're gonna have to add an add familiar call as well, so might as well get started with that. And it looks like it's gonna work pretty much the same way as well, yeah, adding a wall where we get the position out of this chunk pose from tile pose call, and then we just add the low entity. But instead of a wall, we're adding a monster. And then for all of these, well, actually just for the add low entity call, we wanted to add this add low entity result type. So result is actually that right there. And we're going to return that pointer. I don't know, did I actually make that a pointer? Yeah. I get so used to OLS just telling me at this point, whoops, when I've messed something up. Some days I think about just turning it off, but I like being able to just jump into the Odin code when I need to make a call to an Odin package and be able to see kind of what's going on to understand the internals a bit better. And we're just going to return that result. So I guess the notion is that we're going to get rid of having to do this, and then we would just have the pointer to that low entity come back from this add call. That's kind of what his motivation was there. And it looks like he's calling it the low entity. Well, should I just do this and have it be like that? Because that's, yeah, I think that's probably fine. Oh yeah, he hasn't even changed that yet because he still had that get low entity call. Yeah, well, I think I'm more than caught up at this point then. And then this would actually just be accessed like this. And then this would be returned like that. Something like that, right?
And now we don't have to call that anymore, and this is just entity.low, and this is entity.lowIndex, like so. And that can go ahead and return, it could even return just this, although for now I guess I won't do that. We'll see if anyone actually uses that in that way. In fact, I guess I could check right now to see what they're doing. Yeah, it doesn't look like they actually use it. So for now, we'll just leave it that way, but it could be something easy to do is just pass this on, right? Pass it on as we go. And that sort of seems a little compelling. Anyway, so now if I'm going to do this, instead of doing these two things, I'll just do this right here, right, like that. And this will add an entity type monster, and it'll add it at that location. Now,
okay, so good. We were headed in the right direction. That's always a nice feeling. So if I go to pretty much wherever we are adding something, we can go ahead and get rid of all those get low entity calls, which I guess we would have only been doing it in one other place. So this might actually just go away altogether. We'll find out. And I can just work like that and return that, right? Or no, we're gonna have another result. Or is that not true? We're gonna return low index. There we go. Okay. And then might as well do the same thing here for that familiar call that's coming. And the rest of this looks good, I think. Well, actually not quite, right? Because, yeah, there we go. And we'll just access the low again. And that'll be off the low index. And I think we might be good. Might just want to make sure that we can still run. And we can. Sweet.
Now, I don't actually know what the entity monster's height and width should be. I guess I'll just use the same as we were using for the player for now. And they will collide for now, too, because I feel like that just makes sense. And I guess maybe we'll start the trend. What the hell? Let's go ahead and start the trend where we go ahead and return the entity as it was, like that. And this will be add low entity result. So that'll be, oops, that will be just returning that. And same thing with the wall. That'll do it this way. And that'll return that entity here. Oops, entity, whatever that is. And there we go with this. Okay, so that'll go away, and these will become dots. So, and let's take a look if there's anything else we have to fix there. Oops, gotta fix that. Oops, that's no good. There we go.
So it looks like he went ahead and made that change to return the entire result object that he made, which is fine with me, I guess. If there's one thing that kind of stands out to me as something that I wish, and maybe he'll eventually get around to making this clearer even, it's that I wish there was like a source of truth, but we really have these layers, enough layers of indirection flying around at this point that it's hard to know intuitively where to look, but it basically starts with the low entities, right? Or, well, yeah, kind of, because if there's a low entity, then it can have a high entity. Or rather, if there's a high entity, then there has to be a low entity. But if there's a low entity, it doesn't mean we have a high entity. So this is kind of like, it's interesting. I'm relating it a little bit to my experience web programming, and this is definitely not a one-to-one thing, but it's kind of helping me get a sense for this, is that, you know, the things that you can see on the screen would be high and active, and in a sense that's like looking at a front end, right? You're looking at some like data that you can change with input either to the player, right? Or and maybe the player's killing some other entities on the screen, some monsters or even some NPCs, whatever. But there are a bunch of other entities that exist, you know, or the idea of them exists, but you can't see them, and it's because they're hanging around in here and they're not active. And then we track how many we actually have, because this is just our capacity, right? That's what these numbers are, really. We don't have actually this many active entities in the game until we've created them. And then we simply have pointers to these that we have added in these lists hanging around in the world chunks that we've created that make up the entire game world. And I think that's like the most high level summary you're going to get of what's going on at this point, right? And I feel like if I try to get any more detailed about it, I'm gonna screw it up. But I think all of that is basically correct. So let's go ahead and finish making that change, and then we can move on. Whoops, that's great. Let's try that again, and go ahead and break up this line. Is that even gonna? Yeah, that's fine. It's really tough. I discovered, I don't even know how to do it, but I can actually just auto format all of my code, and I'm guessing it uses OLS to do it. But the problem is that it makes the code a lot more vertical. Like it would split up all of these parameters. Well, if I don't know if it will if the parameters for procedure signature are all on the same line. But if they're split up at all like this, right, which I do so that we're not wrapping at all, then it would actually push them all down and indent them over, you know, starting from the beginning of the line here, and they would just go out one indentation, and they would all be on their own separate line. At least I'm pretty sure that's what I was seeing earlier. And I don't have a problem with the way that looks. I really don't care, to be honest with you. The only reason why it's an issue is that I've only got so much screen real estate to work with in the first place, right? So I've got to use as much of the horizontal space as I can because I've only got so many lines here. But anyway, that's a me problem. Wouldn't be a problem if I wasn't streaming any of this, but I am, and so here we are. And that'll return the whole thing. And that might be it. Are we good? Feels like we're good. Nope, not quite. Oh, it's because somewhere we are getting this back and using it for the player. And in that case, I think we just want to call that, oh, because this no longer returns an index, it returns a whole object, and then we might be good now. Hey, Flightmine. Well, you can see for yourself, we do have something on screen at this point. We're adding a little bit more every single day. Sometimes we're just working on, you know, internal stuff, and that's really what the focus has been over the last 2 weeks, is learning how to build an entity system that can handle a whole bunch of entities that lie dormant while we kind of bring the entities that like come into contact with the player or in range of the player. We bring them into like an active state so that they can show up on the screen for the camera, and we can render them and, you know, do more interesting things with their state. So a lot of that has just been very like low level, not a whole lot interesting to look at. So it's been pretty dry and painful as I sift through bugs, but I've been learning a lot. I've been trying to internalize as much of it as I can as I go, and I've certainly got a better idea of where things begin and end at this point. But there's still, I definitely still have some learning to do here. So we'll keep going.
And let's take a look if there's anything else we have to fix there. Oops, gotta fix that. Oops, that's no good. There we go. And add player could just get low index directly off of it, and so that's done. And this is all good now. All right, so that's all good. And we should go ahead and add one of our monsters now, because we can. So when we add this in, I guess what we would do is say, oh, I don't know. We know that this is where the camera is. So I guess what I'll say, I'll do something like camera tile X, like this. Camera tile Y, like this. And camera tile Z. There you go. Camera tile X, camera tile Y, and camera tile Z, like so. And so that way, if I want to do an add monster, I can just kind of put him somewhere near the camera, you know, plus something, right? I can just do him like camera tile Y +2, +2, or something like that, right? Something relatively simple. And that will, I believe, take one of those. So that will add our monster to the world. I think this actually takes that. There we go. So if I run this, I feel like, yeah, I get that. Now, okay, I'm not sure, though. That seems a little bit busted. I don't understand why. That is what I expected him to be a tree, because that's the only other thing we draw right now. So we have to go add the ability to draw monsters as different things. But why did he only appear? Oh, duh. I know why. Again, set camera is, of course, the thing that actually does the work. If you never call set camera, then low entities can't be brought in to the set. And I wonder if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't really know. We might have to think about that a little bit. Like, when we add something, do we need to then check to see if it's inside the camera bounds to know whether maybe at the time we added it, it should be added into the system, right? And I don't know. That's a pretty difficult question to answer, actually. So, you know, maybe I'll go into add low entity and just say to do we need to have a begin end paradigm for adding entities so that they can be brought into the high set when they are added and are in the camera region, right? So you understand what was happening there, right? Basically what happened is I do that one set camera call at the end to sort of set things up, and that's what brings everything into the high.
Sorry to cut him off like that, but I didn't finish writing in that to-do. Okay, hold on. So do we have to have, or do we need to have, a begin and end paradigm for adding entities so that they can be brought into the high set when they are added to the game, something like that?
Are in the camera region, right? So you understand what was happening there, right? Basically what happened is I do that one set camera call at the end to sort of set things up, and that's what brings everything into the high entity set. Until there is a player on the screen, set camera will never be called again because the camera hasn't moved. And so until I hit the spacebar and actually make a player that will start causing set camera to get called, there's no reason why that guy will ever come on screen, right? And so until I actually have the player, that's the only thing that will bring him on. So now,
before we move on, I'll just make sure that we were able to actually add that monster. That monster, it's just a tree right now, but you can see, you can kind of picture how that might be a monster that makes nasty sounds and does nasty things, and you gotta slay him for the good of the orphanage, right? Flight Mind said, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you think so. I think it's awesome too. You know, considering when I started the stream, all we had was that, I think it was just like a blank magenta screen or something like that. Over time, slowly but surely, like it's a lot of trial and error and forging ahead and learning different things and getting, you know, down and dirty with some nitty-gritty code. But eventually the rewards, I think, pay dividends when you can start doing more and more cool things visually on the screen and make small changes that seemingly have big results, right? But really, a lot of the work happened and a lot of the learning happened in these earlier days where you're really piecing together how to write code that plays well together to do a thing, and create, you know, a nice API that lets you move quickly and prototype quickly, like all these things that kind of come together that are honestly hard to articulate. And I find that, you know, no matter how many 20-minute videos you watch of people who try to articulate these things and just say things like write clean code or use OOP or don't use OOP or be functional, like whatever, you know, these kind of snippets of wisdom happen to be, whoever's saying them in whatever direction they're applying them in, I find that it's not sufficient and never will be nearly as sufficient as actually going and doing the thing just over and over until you get good, right? And so that's really what the purpose of this stream is for me.
That should be fixed because I believe I moved him below the set camera. Did I? Yes. So now it should actually, be there the whole time, which it is. So that's what we want, but again, just something to be aware of. I'm not sure if we really care too much about that. It's easy to fix, but I'm not sure what our paradigm, like I said, is going to be for that exactly. So yeah, so that's about it. Okay. Moving on, I guess what I would say is we might as well try drawing this as something a little more recognizable. And so we kind of just we don't have any sort of rhyme or reason to how we're drawing things, and I don't necessarily know that we want to address that now because I feel like we want to address that kind of more when we start working with animation. So what I might do is just the most basic thing here, which is switch on the low entity type, and then go ahead and check to see what actually is the type. Draw each one different. So we've got entity type wall. That will be.
Oh man, I have not written a switch statement in Odin in a hot minute. So let's see if I can do this correctly. I think we want to just switch on the type basically the same way that Casey does, right? And then if I'm not mistaken, Coden and Odin wants the code to be indented with the switch, so it'd be like case hero, and I can't remember if it's just like this and then you have brackets or not, or is there brackets? I guess I can just go and look at that one. I wrote like 2 back when I did the platform layer in SDL. Yeah, so we've got a few partial switches. And yeah, so there's no, I guess you can you write this in brackets? You can if you want, but it just looks a bit cleaner if you don't do it that way, right? At least I assume you can do that. Yeah. OLS isn't complaining, so I assume that's fine. Okay, so yeah, we don't need brackets, but we can just get rid of that. And then over here, it would be like if we have a wall, right? And then we'd want one more for the monster. And we'll just see if we can keep drawing the tree. Just to see if this even works. Unhandled. We did not handle the none case, the familiar case, and was that it? Those are the only other two we have. So, and then it even suggests for you what you should do, right? Isn't that neat? Right here. Suggestion was partial switch what you wanted. I can't highlight it, and I can't even see the whole suggestion, but you get the idea. So I think it's like this. Is that right? Or is it just partial? I guess partial underscore switch would have been redundant. Partial switch switch. So now everything should just be the same, but we can accommodate drawing all kinds of different entity types. This is where like it starts to feel cool and things kind of pay off a little bit more because we're actually doing more stuff on the screen. So that's nice.
Be drawn the way that we were drawing it as this, like so. And then the other thing we can do is go ahead and do an entity type monstar, and monstar will, you know, have something else. I don't know that we care about the default case, where if we don't know what it is, normally I assert on something like that, but in this case, well, in this case, maybe I'll assert on it as well. So we'll do an assertion here where we'll just say invalid code path, right? So basically, if we get to here, we know that we forgot one of our entity types. And I won't put in entity type null as well.
What would be the most appropriate way to do this? Because Odin kind of gives us this feature if we don't use partial, right? And it just tells us before we ever even try to build that we're not handling the case. So we don't have to worry about that. We could just say, you know, none, and then panic. Try to draw the null entity. Maybe that's the way to do it. And then we don't need to use that partial directive. I think I'm fine with that. That's the only other case that we wouldn't handle, right? If we were drawing all of the possible different kinds of entities that could be on the screen at any one time.
So that'll remind us if we're accidentally looping over and drawing the null entity. But so now if we get to monstar, we need to draw something. I think what I'll probably do is maybe just draw, you know, like something like the hero bitmap. Let's do maybe just the torso, right? Like so. And we also had a familiar, did we not? Entity type familiar, right?
Just the torso. Okay. So where was that? We have a torso over here. We're just going to draw a mangled body on the screen at this point. Oh, and I need the hero bitmaps pulled out of here so we don't have to declare it twice. Well, actually, because the monster could be facing in a different direction, so why not? Let's just do this. And yeah, I think that just works. Yep. Now we just got this disembodied torso floating around for our monster. sure.
And the entity type familiar, I think we'll just draw just maybe the head, like so. So we'll go ahead and try that out. And again, this code is just totally garbage placeholder code. So as long as it works at all, I'm totally fine with it. We'll go ahead and do that there. So at that point, we should be, and in fact, I could pull this out for now because people are using it in general. Even though obviously not everyone will look up into hero bitmaps just for our own convenience. So that should give us a Monstar. That's just a little, it's like a little, it's just a little torso with no arms and legs. So, you know, what are you going to do? It's a monster. And I suppose we could also put a shadow in there for that guy while we're at it. So maybe these guys both get shadows. And we have our add monster. So we'll also do an add familiar. And the add familiar is a little bit weird because I'm not sure if the add familiar should collide or if the add familiar is kind of a floating thing, which doesn't really have to collide. So maybe the familiar can just do whatever it wants for now. Just for now. Eventually, maybe not. I think we probably want...
Dang it. Pressing all the buttons except the one I want to press. Okay, so there's all that. What was I even doing just now? I had something that I was trying to do. Oh, we were going to draw the shadow for the monster guy. Did you do the same thing for the familiar?
Put a shadow in there for that guy while we're at it. So maybe these guys both get shadows.
Yeah. Yep, so there it is. And then I don't know if it really matters to draw it first or second, but I guess I'll draw it second the same way he does. And let me see here. Yeah, so back up to the... Oh, geez. Great. Oh, no. No, 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 no. Don't do any of that. So back to the add familiar call. I think he just copied all of this here. And really all we need to do is add a familiar somewhere, right?
And we have our add monster. So we'll also do an add familiar. And the add familiar is a little bit weird because I'm not sure if the add familiar should collide or if the add familiar is kind of a floating thing, which doesn't really have to collide. So maybe the familiar can just do whatever it wants for now. Just for now. Eventually, maybe not. I think we probably want the concept of flying versus on the ground, and so that it would still collide with things that were full height, but it could float over things like, you know, that were whatever. You know what I'm talking about. Standard gamey sorts of stuff, right? You know what I mean. So that, to me, looks relatively good with add familiar. I don't think I really need to do much else with it, like so. And so we can add the monster, and we can add the familiar, and then we will have both of those on the screen at the same time, which is always good. And we'll put this one kind of on the opposite side. And now they should both be there, and there they are. So now what we need to do is we have controller logic in there so that we can move ourselves around, right? And you can see I'm not colliding with this guy because we said it's collide to false, but I am colliding with this guy because we said it's collide to true, so that's good. What I need to do is set up some kind of a notion of when these people think about what they want to do, right? Because we don't need to think about what the player does, really, because we just use whatever the keyboard input or the joystick input is, and that allows us to just, you know exactly what we should be, how we should be updating the player. But we now need some way of taking high entities that are not the player and updating them, right? So what we want to do is put in that structure. And then what we'll do, I guess, is for our familiar, we'll kind of have a notion that maybe the familiar follows anything nearby that's a player, and maybe if it gets too far away, it stops following or something like that. I don't know if we want them to be permanently tagged to a particular player or not, but we'll see. And then the Monstar will do similarly. If it sees a hero nearby, it will try to start attacking it. Maybe we'll give it a projectile or something. I don't know exactly what it'll do. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. I guess we can leave the code running for now. And so the way we would do that is we already have the concept in our code here of looping over the controllers, right, and moving the player. So then what we would need is something where we actually go and loop over the high-level entities, and for every high-level entity, we like update its position, right? Now, I don't know exactly what we want to do in terms of the order of operations here. It's a little confusing because what I could do is I could do the update and the render for those high-level entities in one pass, really. And by the way, we can get rid of this entirely now. We don't even have a tile map to draw anymore, so that can go away. So when we update our high-level entities, and we've already got their high and low state here, I don't know, it might...
I don't even know what code he just got rid of, but I probably already got rid of it. Where was that? Oh, this, yeah, I probably deleted that already. Or not. Was this it right here? Yeah, all this rel row and rel column stuff. Wow. Yeah, we wrote that quite a while ago. Goodbye.
I don't have to draw anymore, so that can go away. So when we update our high-level entities, and we've already got their high and low state here, I don't know, it might be fine to just go ahead and right here do that update. Now, entity offset for frame, I thought we stopped using that. What is that even doing here? That's just, yeah, that's just leftover code, right? We're now doing that offset in the set camera call. So if we go ahead and just say, like, let's start by just putting it here because we already have one loop of everyone and we've already pulled them in. So now would be a good place to do it. Let's say that we want to, yeah, let's say that we just want this to be our code where we update the entity.
Hold on. So we got rid of that, but we're still using it somewhere else. Well, we're using it here, but this is in the set camera call, so this is not. Yeah, that goes away, and then we're not using that anywhere else. Okay, cool.
So let's go ahead and update this entity here. We'll pass the high entity and the low entity, and I believe we already have a structure for this, though, don't we? We've got this essentially. So what I'll do is I'll just say entity. And that entity will have its low index equal to whatever the low index was, which is that. The entity's low pointer will be the low entity, and the entity high will be the high entity, like so. And then we can just go ahead and update that, right? So we update that. We know what our DT is, right? We pass it the game world as well. So we're going to update the entity there, and we're going to update them by this amount. So that's the amount of time that has elapsed, and that seems reasonable, right? So we'll start with that. Seems plausible. So basically, this just has to take an entity.
Get caught up real quick here. I feel like I meant to change all of these high and low entity references, and I think I will. Real quick. And then update entity, which we have yet to write, I'm pretty sure it's called. And we're going to have, what is it, input DT for frame, something like that. Well, all of this code is probably going to become, oh no. Yeah, that's not right. Where's the move player code called? It's only here, and after we verified we have controller input, so not totally sure where we go from here. But that's fine. Real quick, I'm just going to go ahead and change all of these references to a high entity for brevity's sake. I don't even think there's any down here, but I wanted to check. Yeah, so down to here. No, here as well. Okay. So high entity can just become high. Whoops. And low entity can likewise just become low. Well, that was not quite right. But we can do that. And we can fix that. Oh shoot, what the hell happened with that? Something tells me that this is not quite right. This should be that. Yeah, okay. And that should be that. And this doesn't exist yet. That's fine. Let's just make sure I didn't break anything real quick, and we're good. Cool.
So we'll start with that. Seems plausible. So basically, this just has to take an entity, and it has to actually do its update. Now, you know what, though? Thinking about this a little bit further, I actually already am checking its type, too, to render it. So if I wanted to, I could do this. I could collapse this dispatch in sort of a more... I could probably make this a little bit smarter already, actually. So maybe we'll go ahead and do that. Let's take a look at what's going on here. First of all, this... first of all, this jump code. I don't know what to do with this jump code that we threw in there in a Q&A one day. This is not yeah, this is not particularly great. So let's go ahead and see what's going on here. So we've got player RGB. Those are not even being used anymore at all. We can get rid of those for now. We have what the ground point is of this particular entity. That is not something that actually matters per entity at all. That's the same computation for everybody. So we could sort of consider that to be something that's trivial to compute. That's kind of just transforming into that space. We've got the Z is done, yeah, the standard way the Z was done. And then this is really just computing for the rectangle, which is only drawn in like debug scenarios, right? Yeah. So I think what I might do is start to pull this out into some more like slightly more logical things. So let's take a look here. Hold on a second. I want to clean this up a little bit before we go any further. Let's see, we're still doing everything right over here, yeah. So the first thing I want to do is say, well, I don't think this jump code really belongs here at all, obviously. I don't know why it's even here. It's updating the equations of motion for this guy's Z, but really if it was going to do that, it should probably be in some kind of, well, you know, I mean, now that I think about it, I guess if everyone's under the influence of gravity, I suppose that's fine. This is actually all right. I mean, everyone could have their DZ updated with gravity. I mean, gravity applies to everybody. Yeah. All right. Well, you know what? I guess I changed my mind. We'll let it stay on there. So we'll call this shadow alpha, and we'll just go ahead and leave that on there. I mean, if it works, it works. You know, don't kill it. So basically, this is just how we would update the Z for the guy after we already did his regular updating. And I suppose that could be baked into whatever equations of motion update we do. So maybe I could just have sort of a universal equations of motion update happen in here for anyone who actually wants it. So I'd pull out the collision detection stuff, and that would kind of come in here, and then we just have that happen, and the Z would be rolled into it. Seems reasonable. Guess I don't see a real overwhelming reason why not to do it. And so yeah, I guess we could actually do that. And similarly, I could kind of make these things queue up a little bit. I could say whatever you want to draw, you just kind of say where those things were relative to you, and then we'll draw them. Okay, all right, let's go with that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to collapse these two things down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say that we've got some kind of a rendering concept here. So I'm going to say that we've got something like, you know, something like this. I'm going to call it a rendered piece or something, or an entity piece, right? I don't know, entity visible piece. I don't know. I have no idea what the name of this should be, but for right now, it doesn't really matter. And essentially what that's going to be is it's going to be a piece of information that tells us exactly what I would draw offset from some magical point, like the player's ground location, right? And so what I'll do is I'll say, here is that bitmap. Here are the offsets for it. So this is like a DX, I guess I should say offset like this. And we really need to put in some three-dimensional vectors. It's getting long in the tooth. And then we'll also say what the alpha was for it. So, you know, we got this entity visible piece. And then I'll just make a really simple little stack here, which just says pieces, right? And we'll say that, I don't know, things have 8 pieces for now. This is, again, totally random. No real concern for it. And we'll just say piece count, like so. And then for each one of these guys, as we go, and in fact, I guess I could go one step further and say entity visible piece group, like this. And that will actually just be these. There we go. Oops, not quite. Okay, and so for every one of those that we have, entity visible piece group, this is our piece group.
I try my best to keep up, but inevitably I just start lagging, and I have to get caught up. So we got okay, never mind. He had this piece count thing, which is, did he stuff that in the type? No. I don't know what happened to that. Maybe, did I rewind and I just wasn't paying attention? No? Whatever. So we have a piece group. Oh, okay. Yeah, he stuffed that in a new type. So, entity piece group. Just like that. Yeah. And then we have to go define that entity piece, and we'll go ahead and do that. We have a count, and we have pieces. We got 8 of them. So we're gonna like construct an entity from all its bits and pieces, like you know how the hero has 3 of them. It'll be a totally different ball game once I someday get into like wanting to draw meshes on the screen and stuff like that, but can't worry about that too much right now.
When we come in here, I will just change our draw bitmap calls to something that's essentially add piece, right? So we're going to add a piece, and each one of these things will be an add piece call. And then at the end, we'll just loop over them, right, like so, and we'll draw them. Okay. And what this will let me do is this will let me kind of split those out, and so that the update call can kind of decide where it wants its stuff, and then at the end it kind of gets collapsed down. And so that way we only have one piece of logic for each entity that both does the updating and the rendering, which, I don't know, like I said, feels like a little bit better to me at the time, but we'll see. It may end up being not what we want, and we'll rip it back out. So let's see.
I don't know. I think he sticks with it. I think he commits to this idea, and I remember it feeling pretty good when all is said and done, so I guess we'll just start doing the same thing. Down here, so... Right. Is that right? He goes to draw it, okay, at the very bottom. And so all the way down here, but still inside of the loop, we would do something like for piece in 0 to piece group, and it would be less than, I think. Piece group dot, I don't know if I like piece count. I think we can just call it count. Ugh. There we go. And I still need that draw call. And then it'll be something like this. Like, I think the align X and Y will wind up being the offset. Or no, maybe... No, ground X and Y should probably be the same. I shouldn't assume. But I think it's going to be something like this, right? Like piece, offset, X. Oh, and then, yeah, definitely piece alpha. What are you complaining about? Oh, well, I need to get the actual piece out. It would be piece index. I wonder if this would be a place where, and it hasn't really come up in a while, where I would probably rather do things in a more idiomatic Odin way. Well, I say that, but I was just talking about idiomatic, trying to write more idiomatic Odin code yesterday with that passing an allocator in by reference and not knowing if that's idiomatic or not. I feel like it wouldn't be that hard to find other instances of that in the Odin code base, but not really the time and place to worry about that at this point. So yeah, instead of this just being a fixed length, like we could just do something like this, and then, you know, for every number of pieces, right, we would just, I think that's probably where I'll go. I don't know. I'm undecided for the moment. I'll just keep doing it the way Casey's doing it, but things like that, I think, call for a dynamic array. Okay, so back down over here. We go ahead and get the piece out of the piece group at that index, and now what? Has no field offset. Really? Offsets. Okay. Sure, be that way. Now what? That's fine. We're going to have to change some of this inevitably, I'm sure, so just keep moving forward.
So we've got our piece group here, and it's got a count. I guess I shouldn't bother saying piece count because we know that's what that is. So we've got our count, and we can loop over it for each one of the pieces in it, just here. I will grab that piece out, like so, piece index, yeah, and here's my piece group, like that. And in here, I can now say, all right, what were the things that I needed? We've got the buffer, we've got the bitmap that we need. We know this is going to be, oops, not bitmap torso, just bitmap. We know that we've got essentially wherever the thing was, so we've got these things, right? Whatever these are, we'll compute those after the fact down here, right? And that will be our...
All right, so all of this business, what was that? The ground point, the Z, the left top, the entity dimensions. I feel like this can just be declared there. Doesn't really matter. And that goes away. We go to our piece stuff and drop that in there. And then all these draw bitmap calls will become, what was it, add piece. Which we've yet to write, but that's okay.
Piece, this is our offset X, oops, like so. This is our piece offset Y. Yeah, and it's also plus the piece offset Z, like so.
Dang it. I was looking at that. I was like, where is the offset going to go? I should have just looked at the call and been like, yeah, because the alignment is a different thing. So, damn it, I don't even know what that was before. Well, that's going to have to change too anyways, but I think this is right. So, I wasn't completely wrong. We'll just pass in 0 for those for the moment.
And then in there, we need to bake in that offset by what the actual ground point is. So this is the entity ground point here, X and Y, and we will go ahead and put those in there. And again, these are some pretty good candidates for vectorizing. Haven't really done it yet, but really we should probably switch to 3D. It's on my list of things to do. When we do the animation system, I think I'm kind of putting it off because we didn't really have to do it, but that'll be sort of when that has to happen. All right, and so we also need alignment on there as well. So these offsets, I guess the offsets can just bake in the alignment, now that I think about it, actually. So yeah. So why...
Yeah, I thought that was weird. I made that offsets, and it should just be offset. And this was supposed to be plus, oops, the offset's Z coordinate. New line that, entity, ground point, plus that, and then, well, that was, I didn't call it point, I just called it X, and then the same thing for the Y. Cool.
Actually, why were we placing... So yeah, if I think about this a little bit more carefully, we kind of have two things. You want to collapse them both down. We have the alignment, but the alignment can be collapsed down into the offset. If we're placing something, we don't need to have two different ways to place it, right? And so we've really got two competing things. There's how you would want to move it relative to where you are, and then there's like how the bitmap was aligned separate from where you're sort of hotspotting it, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and say, let's take a look at that draw bitmap call, because all it's doing is subtracting those numbers out, right? So maybe what I want to do is just eliminate that concept now and say that that's going to be tracked a little bit higher up, one level back, basically. Just get rid of that and say we're no longer doing that. That happens at a slightly higher level to draw bitmap. And that way, when we pass it down, we just pass it down those things preordained. So that seems a little smarter to me. That seems to be a more logical thing for us to do. Okay, and then obviously we have...
All right, remains to be seen how we will do that, but it just seems like we're... So I have to shadow these, or do I? Yeah, because we don't manipulate those values otherwise, do we? Nope. So that's good. I actually like that a lot.
Those numbers out, right? So maybe what I want to do is just eliminate that concept now and say that that's going to be tracked a little bit higher up, just one level back, basically. Just get rid of that and say we're no longer doing that. That happens at a slightly higher level to draw bitmap. And that way, when we pass it down, we just pass it down those things preordained. So that seems a little smarter to me. That seems to be a more logical thing for us to do. Okay, and then obviously we have to do our piece alpha as well. All right, so we've got our entity ground points there. We've got the Z, which is going to be however high he is according to his thing there, and that's fine.
I missed this right here. So the bitmap is actually on the piece, and was it a pointer? It was. And of course it is. That makes more sense than copying the whole thing.
So that actually would go in here, I guess, as well. That would be concatenated on there. Whatever we said was the entity Z, I guess, something like this, right? And the player left top and the entity width height are really for debugging only. So for right now, we don't actually need those, but we might want to leave those in there because we want to start drawing rectangles here to show, like, as a debug situation where somebody is, maybe those come back into play. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a push piece call. Those of you who know me know I like a good push. Like a good push call. I'm a pusher. It's true. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And so these are just going to basically push pieces onto this little piece stack, right? It's kind of like a piece pipe, but it's a piece stack in this case. And nobody is getting high off it. So what we will do now is go ahead and make sure that we eliminate any of the things that we had before that were not necessary. So we really don't need, so basically this is just always zeros. We don't have any offsets that we need to apply to our dude at all. In this particular case, we only have the alignment, and that should be it, right? Because we don't have different pieces like hands or floating parts that attach. Everything was actually right at the origin, and then we have the alignment from the bitmap, which we pass along, and then we have the shadow alpha. Now what we could do here too is really this should be...
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what the signature of this is actually going to look like, which I have no idea at this point what that's going to be. But I think this is going to be nice because it's going to make this code feel a lot less... broken apart to spare us the wrapping, the look of that code wrapping. So yeah, that can go away, and then you would just do that, I think. Oh, wait a minute, what? Yeah, there we go. Not sure what happened there. I think I deleted an extra line. So do that. Just drop that in there. Get rid of those there. That looks good. Dang it. That's looking better. Well, I'm moving too far ahead, actually, because we don't know if that's going to be the case for the wall.
In X, Y, and a Z, so this should really be, you know, one of these, right? So this should be one of those. There we go, and so on. So these are the pieces that he would want. Similarly, we come down.
I get excited whenever I see him make a change that I don't need to make just because I'm writing Odin. This will just splat the V2 parameter that he's going to turn that into 0. And that's great. Don't have to change anything.
Down here, we can get rid of this as well. We'll put this down here with this guy, like that. So, oops, gotta get out from behind my head. And so, yeah, that's about all I really wanted to do here. This is, again, just a 0, 0, and 0, and then it takes the 4080. Those could probably be wrapped up as V2s as well now. I think that would probably be reasonable, right? So maybe we'll do that next. Let's see. To do alignments as V2, right? In fact, I could go ahead and just do that directly. Let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and say, let's do that. So this will take a V2 4080, like that. And these guys, I'll just have the hero bitmaps. We'll just collapse those down into a line, like so. And that'll be that.
Oh, yeah, that's much better. So this will just look like that. And now this proc call can fit on one line. That's always real nice. So, yeah. Oh, but this one still needs to take the alpha. Dang it! That's not going to work quite as well, but it's still better. It's still progress. Is that right? It's looking right. And over here, this is going to be like that. I have no reason to believe the rest of this. I just feel like these parameters should go away,
that
but
all looks
we'll
good.
see.
Piece group, again, like this. And let's go ahead and put in the standard unused stuff. Then we've got our hero bitmaps. Oops, that's no good. Hero bitmaps align. And there's that shadow alpha. Okay, so yeah, again, not really doing anything particularly interesting here, just rote transformation of the code so that it's just a little bit easier for me to manage what's going on. And these are all push piece calls, push piece, push piece, push piece, oops, push piece, push piece, lovely. And then these are just, probably should have done this with a macro. Was too lazy to think it through. It's true. I admit that. Okay, so that's all the stuff that we need there, but now we need to go.
I guess I'm just as lazy because, I mean, I can change all of those names, but I can't do all this other stuff. I'm not quite that crafty. You can't do all of that in one big Vim command. Not quite there with my Vim skills yet. If I will ever be, I have no idea. Whoops, that is not what I meant to do. Jeez. So that just becomes that, and this will look like that. Well, this can continue to be on 2 lines because we got to pass in that shadow alpha value. It's looking okay. And that looks like that. Okay. I think we're good. Yeah, the whole switch statement almost fits on one screen, but not quite. It's a lot to look at, man.
So fix sort of our bitmap, our loaded bitmap. If you remember, I just said I wanted to change the alignment to actually being a V2. So we're going to go ahead and say that that's a V2 now, which means we'll have to actually fix the align here to be looking like this. There we go. So that's that. And I guess these are all the same, huh? So I could just do this. All right. Shadow alpha.
All of these, huh? It's all the same, so I can just yank them. I think that works. Yep, good to go.
Alpha is this value here, right? Shadow alpha. And of course, that's a little confusing because that one, you really kind of want to know what it would actually be a little later on. So it's kind of like a deferred rendering thing that we're doing here. So I'm not sure. That may have been a little bit of a mistake. We'll have to think about how we want to...
Oh, man, you just used the term. I've had this article sitting open in a browser tab for like weeks now about deferred rendering versus forward rendering, and then there was a forward plus rendering or something like that. And I'm reading, and there's all these terms that I'm combing over as I read it, and I go, I'm just not there yet. I can't read this article and get anything out of it because so much of this is so foreign to me. But he just said a thing. I've heard that term before. Still can't tell you what it means off the top of my head, but I've heard it before.
We want to kind of think that through. Because after we do the update, yeah, I mean, we could... it's so hard to say. So you see what my dilemma is. I'm thinking now that maybe I didn't really need to do that, because what I should possibly have done is just made a call that's like, okay, update my equations of motion, and you just call it here, instead of trying to make it so that you put the logic in here and then the stuff executes outside. Did I make a mistake? Is it possible that we just don't need this extra? Because what I was doing was essentially deferring the rendering to later so that we could do some stuff in between it. But what I was really realizing is I could just put it in here directly. Well, I'll keep going down this path. I just want to see. Maybe it does make some things a little easier later. We'll find out. But for right now, I guess I should just finish what I did, because then at least I'll be able to see if it was smart or if it was stupid in a little more detail. So I think I did just about everything except for push piece. So I just got to go implement push piece, and that's it, right? So push piece is up here. Either way, I'm glad we changed to V2s on the alignment, so that's a good thing. Either way. But we just may not have needed to do this push piece bit. That may have just been unnecessary. So there's the group, right? Here's the loaded bitmap. There's the bitmap we're going to use. Here is the offset. Here's the offset Z. And here is the alignment. So what we're going to do...
So one thing that I did not catch, which he probably already changed, right, is he actually passes the... no, he didn't change that yet. Well, he changed it in some places, but not all of them. So everywhere that there is a frame buffer reference. We can just replace that with group. Come on now, you can do it. Oh, no, you can't. What? What? There we go. That's better. And now actually, can this all fit on one line? It can. We did it. It's a Christmas code miracle. Okay. And then, are we using that? We're using that somewhere else, aren't we? When we actually do the draw bitmap call. Need to change it here too. And there. And should this be a reference? I don't think it really matters. What did he do? Is pieces a bunch of pointers? What did I do here? That was supposed to be a list of 8, wasn't it? Why did that become a slice? I don't remember doing that. They are the actual thing. They aren't pointers, so... Interesting. Well, yeah, no. I don't know. It probably doesn't matter, but we'll just make it a pointer because it looks like that's what he does.
So I just got to go implement push piece, and that's it, right? So push piece is up here. Either way, I'm glad we changed to V2s on the alignment.
Oh,
so that's
God, what?
Either way.
Windows, what have you done to me? Pressed the wrong keys and unspeakable things happened. Okay, let's go back over here.
Not have needed to do this push piece bit. That may have just been unnecessary. So there's the group, right? Here's the loaded bitmap. There's the bitmap we're going to use. Here is the offset. Here's the offset Z, and here is the alignment. So what we're going to do now is we're going to, again, just make sure that we've got room for this guy. So we'll make sure that the group piece count is less than the space that we have so that we're not going to overflow it. And then we'll go ahead and stick it onto the end of that guy, right? And so here is our entity visible piece, like so. We can inline this guy.
Let me fix this function signature here. It's a long one, but this should actually be the group, and it's a pointer to the piece group, like that. And this is our bitmap pointer. Yeah, that's right. Like that. And then the offset, which is a V2. And oh, I'm actually gonna make that a V3, I think. Hold on. Let's go back here and see, because we already have vector 3s. And I think we're good to go ahead and use them here. So we can make this even shorter. This is risky. This could bite me and then I have to spend some time debugging something stupid, but I'm gonna do it. And it's on me if it backfires. So that can just be vector 3. And the alignment is a vector 2. And is that it? Oh no, there's still that shadow, which is an F32. We're getting there.
so it can kind of fold away. So here's our piece. And then we will, I guess, just fill these out. There doesn't seem to be anything particularly tricky about that. So there's our offset minus the alignment, again, because we're folding those into one variable. So there's our offset z, and then our alpha is our alpha, which we still need to put on as a default parameter since only some people pass it. Oh, I guess we don't really need to return.
Okay, so the count that we currently have, we're going to grab an empty piece out of there, increment this. Yeah. Now that I think on it, there's probably all sorts of places where I can do some nice quality of life things for myself. Basically, wherever we are incrementing a count, right? I mean, we could make, and we did that a ton for the low and high entity stuff. Like these could just be dynamic, and then, you know, we would never have to, well, yeah, if they were dynamic, we wouldn't have to go off the count. We would just go off the length, right? I don't know, something to think about. I don't want to mess with that right now. And probably not anytime soon, really, in case the code changes a bunch again, but definitely some good food for thought, I think. Yeah. So this, yeah, so the count gets incremented. I guess one way I could do this to like make that feel like it's happening on one line is to actually do it on one line. I don't know how I feel about that. But like those things always need to happen together, at least for now, until we do use a dynamic array or something. So I'll just leave that at that for the moment. Bitmap equals the bitmap. And then the offset is the offsets x and y minus the alignment. Some awesome Odin array programming is happening, unless I screw it up, which it looks like I did. Well, what is this? That's a V3. And that's a V3. Where did I go wrong here? Because, okay. Yeah. So can I just do this then? Does that work? Damn. What is the actual error here? Cannot. Yeah, so it's basically, oh man. Well, I guess what we could do is create a new thing out of this and then just drop it in here. That would have been so cool if that worked. I guess I'll just call this alpha. Yeah, and that's a default of 1 to make it opaque, right? Yeah, how do I want to do this? I mean, there's an obvious way to do it, but I wanted like a more fun way to do it. We'll just say offset XY like that. Because the problem is that we've bundled the Z together with the X and Y, but we only subtract from the X and Y alignment. I guess one way you could do it yeah. Well, if you passed in the alignment as a vector 3, where are we actually passing a value in? 40, 80. Like you could pass this in as a vector 3 and then just make the 0, or rather make the last value, make the Z value a 0, and then that would be fine. But then the hero bitmaps, like when we're setting those up, then we'd have to set the Z in those to be 0 as well. I don't know. Maybe it's just not worth getting too clever about, and it often isn't. So yeah, we'll just say that this is a new thing. And that the offset is actually off of that. Looks kind of nasty. I'll think about it and see if there's a more graceful way to do that, but it'll do for now.
Anything? Let's just avoid. And that's it. So let's see. That's just count. I guess I really wanted to call it piece count. So maybe if I really wanted to call it piece count so badly, I was right the first time when I called it piece count. So let's go ahead and just change it in the other place. Let's see. Cannot convert argument 1. Yes, that's because it's not pointing to the buffer anymore. There we go. And there is our piece count that we said we were going to do. And then we also have, let's see here, 32 piece index. And it's less than piece group.piece count. What are you saying? Piece potentially uninitialized local variable. Oh, right. And we need to obviously set this guy's piece count at startup to be 0. Thank you, compiler. That was handy. Oops. What did I didn't I didn't remember I still had the game running. And we changed the layout of things there. That was not my intention, but I forgot. All right. So let's see here. Piece count is 8. How is that possible? What did I? Oh, you know why? I put that in the wrong place. Meant to put it here each time. So basically, it's every entity just has its own. Yeah, like the assert caught that there. All right. So now we're doing.
I see. Yeah. I was like, I don't have to do that. We're 0 initialized. Oh, right. Because we just keep adding pieces. We just do that, and then we're good. But I have a bunch of other errors here. Index 2 is out of bounds. Oh, because, yeah, I forgot to back that off. Where was that? Get rid of that. And entity dim is missing, and he if zeroed that out, so what do I care? I'll just well, the way to do that would actually be to not draw it here. And in fact, this still takes a frame buffer, so that's just bad. Like, all that stuff is still not declared. I think I'll just take this and dump it down here. And then this should be entity left top, and that's fine for now. What is the matter? Well, this should be bitmap, right? I didn't finish making that change. Are we good now? Will it run? Will it work? Will it blow up? It blows up. Great. Okay. Well, and I didn't even get a useful error message there, so that's fantastic. The only thing that we've really changed is down here, so I guess I'll just drop a print statement. Make sure we can actually still get down into this deferred rendering code. Yeah, let's just do it. Can we do it? Can we make do? Can we do it? We'll find out. Okay, so we can do that, but I'm guessing like one of the first push piece calls is probably failing. Yeah, so it's that first call. What goes wrong for us there? We get out these pieces here. Well, this should probably be a reference to a piece, shouldn't it? And maybe that'll be it. I don't know. Yep. That was it. Of course. That was weird. I feel like I should have gotten that print statement. Did I really not get it? Because we're like pushing it, but we didn't push it correctly. Yeah, no, we don't get it. So like what actually happens here if we don't take the reference? I don't know. It's probably not worth thinking about, to be honest.
The exact same thing we were doing, nothing special, but we've now got it into that sort of bucketed form. And so now what I can do is I can start to pull this apart a little bit more cleanly here. So what I could do is start updating these guys actually in here. Now walls don't need any update. Familiars do need an update, so there'd be an update familiar call, right, like this, and monster. So we'll have an update monster call, where I'll go ahead and call out to something that does a bunch of logic for those guys. And again, that'll just take the entity that we prepared and the game state. And I guess it also probably wants that DT, huh? So we'll call that, and we'll have our update monster call as well. And then we can actually start implementing some code that those guys use. Now, this code right here really wants to get executed later, right? And that's why I'm saying that the
DT for frame, I guess I didn't notice. Yeah, we did actually make something out of that. So, yeah. The entity and DT. Do that. And do we call anything special anywhere else? Nope, not yet.
shadow alpha is a bit of a problem because the shadow alpha really wants to be computed after we figure out what the actual z is. And so that was a little bit of a mistake. That was the thing that I was starting to think that maybe this was wrong, because really what we should be doing is making a utility function that computes these things, and then you still do the draw call. I don't really know. It's a good question, and one that I'm not super prepared to answer. What we can do for now is compute our shadow alpha incorrectly. So what I could do is say, oh, okay, you know, what we'll do is we'll make that be something that happens up here, right? So I'll just do like to do, this is incorrect, should be computed after update, or something like that, and we'll kind of think about that. But again, this is exactly why I'm doing this now, is because I kind of want to see where and why various things should be happening. All right, so
he just moved it to where I already had it, the shadow alpha stuff, and I don't understand then where it was before. Was it way down there? Yeah, it was down in the actual drawing code. I see. He moved it down and then back up again. Somehow I didn't see that happen.
Utility function that computes these things, and then you still do the draw call. I don't really know. It's a good question. Be something that happens up here, right? So I'll just do like to do, this is incorrect, should be computed after update, or something like that, and we'll kind of think about that. But again, this is...
Okay, so all of this does need to go down there, right? Right up above here. But how is that the case? Because then we don't have our DT. So that needs to go up there too. But everything else can stay down here? Is that right? Oh, we have to add those calls. We'll find out.
Exactly why I'm doing this now is because I kind of want to see where and why various things should be happening. All right, so if we want to make these functions now as just sort of some test functions that we can do, what I could do again is just make it so that it moves like towards the closest player or something like this, just something real simple, just to see what happens, and we'll go from there, right? So here's our update familiar call, here's our update monster call, so we should still compile presumably. Looks like I don't have DT anymore. Where's my DT? There it is. So I gotta put that up at the top. There we go. And now our things are getting updated, but they just don't have any update logic of interest, right? And so, you know, let's give them some update logic of interest. Let's go ahead and say that we want to try and find that familiar. And this is the part, we want to try and find a hero that's nearby. This is the part that I was saying kind of wants to have a spatial partition for our high entities instead of our low entities at this point. Because if this guy's in the high entity set, then when we gotta go loop over, we'd have to loop over all of our high entities, which just seems like it's entering into a bad n squared kind of situation, right? And so this is the other place that I was saying we kind of want a spatial partition for our high entities as well. But we'll see. We'll see for now. So we're gonna go ahead and do the n squared route. We're gonna say...
What? Why no worky? Why do you no work? That entity is not a reference. Now it'll work. Cool. And then he goes and grabs that high index loop and has the familiar look for a player, right? Isn't that what he just said?
Let's loop over all the high entities in the game state, looking for somebody who is a hero, right? So what we're going to do is say, all right, I've got some test entity here, high entity star test entity, or I guess I should say test high entity. What's the, we should have a way, and I don't know if we actually do, right? get high entity, we kind of need the opposite thing here, which is the thing that chases. Yeah, so like this function is lousy, right? Because what that really does is that brings a guy into the high entity set. So it's really a force low to high kind of a thing, if that makes sense. This is really the wrong name. This is really, get high entity is really force entity into high, or something like that, right? Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes any sense, but you see what I'm saying, right? It's like forcing a low entity into the high set, which is not the same thing. Whereas here, what we might want to do is, it would be nice if we had an easy way of saying to like get both, right? And I guess what I could do is I could say, all right, entity test entity equals you know entity from high index, like this. There we go. That seems like a reasonable way to say it. Entity from high index, and then I go ahead and say that. And that gets me back both, because since I know it's a high, I know I'll get back both entities always, because there's always the low as well. All right, so if I'm doing that, then I can go ahead and test here. I can say if the test entity type, right, is a hero type, this. If the test entity low type is a hero type, then I know that I want to follow it, I guess. I want to take a look. So maybe I'll look for whichever one's closest. So I'll say, you know, closest hero D or something like this. And I'll have, right, closest hero. And so what I'll do is I'll say the closest hero distance is going to be equal to some maximum search radius that I don't want to look outside of, right? And so maybe, you know, I am looking in a 10-meter radius or something like this. So if somebody goes, if it's outside of 10 meters, I don't look anymore, something like that, right? So that's the maximum radius, you know, 10-meter maximum search or something like that. So we go through here and we say, I want to be able to compute the distance between these two. Of course, that's very easy for us to do. And I guess what I say is closest hero D, let's do it squared as well. Because that way we don't have to do square roots in here, which, you know, are superfluous to a test, because obviously whatever value would be lowest squared is also the same as being the lowest value if it was square rooted. So we don't actually care either way. We just want the lowest one. We don't need to know what the actual length is. So that will allow us to do a length squared. Remember, if you remember from our vectors.
Hold on. So this was going to be like a math.pow call, I think. And what does that take? Whatever you want it to take, as long as it's a float, I guess. So we're squaring it, just like that. And then the length squared call was like length 2, wasn't it? Or was that's actually off of the lin-alg package. Length 2, yeah. Nice.
We've got our length squared here. I can always compute the length squared of the distance between any two entities. I can just take the two entities' positions and subtract them, right? So I can basically say the test entity P minus my entity P, that's the distance between us, right? And so if I take a look at the distance between us, that will give me the test d squared, the test distance squared. And now I can say if the closest distance squared is actually greater than that, meaning that whatever I found so far is further away, then this becomes the new best one, right? And so closest hero becomes the test entity. So that just grabs whatever that closest one is of that particular type. And then if I had one, right, if closest hero, you know, entity index, if there actually is something there, I could just say if it's got a high pointer, then what I want to do is I just want to move towards it, right? I just want to move towards it. So it seems logical to me, and I guess I don't actually know, but it seems logical to me that what we should probably do is at that point we could just recycle. I guess I should implement this function as well. Just recycle our function for moving the player to move the familiar, because it should probably move with the exact same rules, I would think, right? Seems pretty straightforward, relatively uncontroversial. So what I need to do here, though, is I need to be able to do this entity high index thing. So let's get a result here, like so. And I've got my high, my low, and my index. So this is the, what do we actually call this? Do we call it low index? I forget. It is called low index, low index. All right, and so what we need to do here is I need to get the high entity first, because that's actually what we have the index for. So this is high entities, and that's going to be plus the high entity index.
So we got to go and write that procedure, but I have some issues here. Well, this doesn't know that we're going to get back an entity type, an entity with a type, so that's fine. And this is complaining because this should take, no, that should work, shouldn't it? Oh, yeah, because we don't know what this type is yet either. Okay. And this is probably just a nil check. Okay. In that case, I think we can just go ahead and write that. We got our result. And it's going to have all of these things to it. This will be like result dot high dot low entity index, right? And then this is coming off of high entities list at that index, and that is a reference. And then are we going to be calling get low entity again here? We'll see. Shadow Alpha sounds like the next Sonic villain. Yeah, I was like looking at that and I kind of just wanted to change it to Alpha because Shadow Alpha just feels kind of superfluous. Where all are we? Like, I get that it's supposed to designate that we're talking about the Shadows Alpha specifically, but I mean, we could want to do the same thing to the player character for whatever reason. And it would be an alpha, like let's say you like wanted to have like a either an invincibility or like an invisibility or a transparency power up that would let you like phase through walls or something. Then you would want to change, you know, the image you're drawing that you're rendering to be transparent. I think I'll just change it to alpha for brevity's sake. Less stuff on the screen is always appreciated by me. I think that's that. Do we have any more references to that? Nope. Okay. So where was that? Entity from high index. Okay. Yeah, is this going to be a method call or a procedure call? Am I going to have to reintroduce this? Let's find out.
Probably also assert that the high entity index is actually in the range of the high entities. Oops, high entities. There we go. So that we know that we're not out of there. And I guess I could also assert that high entity index, or you know what, I could even just check. I guess I should say if someone asks for the 0, they should just get back the 0, so that if they, you know, they don't have to double check.
Seems pointless to write this anyways, and I've started doing it again because I was getting self-conscious about the fact that I was hitting so many bugs yesterday while wrapping up that spatial partitioning stuff. That I thought, oh, is it because I don't have these asserts? Do I not have asserts catching things? That should never need to be written. It really shouldn't. I should just get comfortable not writing those kinds of asserts because I don't need to. We have bounce checking. Should this be greater than 0? That's basically what he's saying, right? And then, of course, we want to return the result. Now down here, this needs to be off of the low, actually, not the high. And then the rest of that looks good.
All right, so the low index is then going to be whatever the high says the low index was, right? And the low is going to be just the same exact lookup, the low entities plus the low entity index, right? And so that gets back to full suite, just the way we wanted to before.
So he did not call get low entity, and it kind of makes sense because that call does that bounds checking on the index, but we should never need to do that, right? Because if there's a high entity in the game state's high entities, that high entity should have a correct low entity index pointing back into the low entities.
And again, it's a little wonky. I don't love how much of this extra addressing that we'll have to be doing. I don't know that it's actually too expensive, but it's unfortunate that we have to do it. And so it might be interesting to start thinking about other things we could do there if it turns out to be a problem for us, right? Again, we'll have to see. Okay, 5-minute warning.
Could do a flashlight effect by making a rectangle alpha that fills the screen except for the flashlight cone. Yeah, like there's all sorts of... See, that's what I'm looking forward to experimenting with on stream. That's the place that we want to get to, where we can start doing really fun stuff like that, just to play around with different ideas. And then the stream will kind of become this very cool, like co-game development stream where we can do different things visually that are interesting. But you could really get lost in the weeds messing with stuff like that, right? That are just neat to do for its own sake, but at some point I'll have to get very focused. And maybe that'll be a thing where like different days of the week we'll do stuff like that, and other days of the week will be more concentrated on like a particular game design effort. Like, let's try and, you know, make this thing make sense. How can we add this and have it make sense to the game? Like, I keep coming back to this idea that doing like a really good horror game would be a fun challenge, because I've never really liked horror games all that much, because they tend to just not do a very good job at being scary. But that doesn't mean they can't be a lot of fun, right? Like, it's a lot of fun to play horror games in a group setting. And I mean, if you just look at like something like Five Nights at Freddy's, like I never played any of those games, but the cultural relevancy that a horror game can have can be kind of fun to observe. And so sometimes I think about what that would look like, but there's too many fun paths to go down. I wish I had time to do it all.
We are being warned. That's okay. 5-minute warning seems totally fair. Like I said, this is relatively complicated stuff that we're going to start doing here. So now that we have a move player call, I think what we probably want to do is change this into a move entity call, right? Because there's nothing particularly player-y about it. The only thing that was player-y was the thing where it moves it if it hits the stairs, but I guess that would probably be something that actually happens for everyone, I would guess. Not sure. But so I feel like this is probably something that we could use for everybody. I don't see any real reason why we can't. So I feel like we could just go ahead and make this a move entity call. And so we can go ahead and move the entity in exactly this way. So, all right, so we can pass the game state, we can pass the entity, and we can pass whatever we want our DDP to be, right? And that's something that we'll have to compute. But that's basically what we'll do. And then we also have to go ahead and change the old call to be move entity. Okay. So let's see. That's game state. And the DDP here, what I want to do is I want to move him in the direction.
I didn't even bother to look at what we want to pass in here. So game state. I was going to rewind and look at what he did, but you know what? We have the code. It's all right here available to us. We can do it ourselves. Game state. Well, we don't have a DT. Oh, no, yeah, we do pass it in. I forgot. And then the acceleration. Where does that come from? Or was he just saying that he needed to start calculating that?
Of the hero. So what that would be is the closest hero, right? I'd want to take wherever the closest hero was and subtract my position, which gets me a vector that basically points at the hero. And then I just want to normalize that and factor in some kind of speed, right? So what I want to do is I want to change this to be a vector of length 1, which we talked about how to do that already. We just have to divide by its length. And I guess I already have the length. We have the closest hero d squared here, right? So what I need to do is I need to square root that, right, in order to get the actual length back. And then I would just go ahead and invert it, right? So there's my 1 over. So this is 1 over length, like so. And I'll just multiply that right here. And so that gets me my DDP, right, at unit length. So what I actually need in addition to the unit length is I need the speed here, right? So I need some notion of the meters per second traveled by this guy, of meters per second squared, I guess, whatever his acceleration is, right? I guess I could say acceleration, like that. I need a notion of that. I don't know what his acceleration should be. I don't know accelerations very easily. Yeah. But hey, look at that. He follows me around. Let's make him a little slower. He's a bit zippy right now. Let's kind of tone that down a little bit. Let's make him sluggish. Seems a little bit better. I don't know. Still, that seems... What's my acceleration? I feel like we maybe have a bug here. Is that right?
Let me just finish implementing this basic familiar code here. So this should actually be a minus. I'm going to subtract those two. Yeah, we're just doing... this calculation here to drive the familiar towards the Hero. And I think it's that simple, maybe? Just want to make sure I don't have any really dumb typos that could force me to spend a lot of time. Oh, of course. I just cast that to an F32, so you'll shut up. There we go. Let's see. Get high entity should be force entity into high now. I guess we have to new line that, which is okay by me. Then move player becomes move entity. And now we should have a little disembodied head flying around. Leave me alone, sicko. Another thing that I'm really interested in exploring is a really interesting familiar mechanic, or familiar system, I guess I should say. Companion system. I'm trying to think of games that have done a really good job of this. I haven't played a ton of them. But the one that just like instantly pops into mind, look at that, I can get him stuck behind the monster. There you go. Get away from me. Ew. Ew. The Last of Us, right? Where you're Joel and Ellie's following you around, and she will like sometimes throw you ammo or med kits and stuff like that. And I felt like that worked pretty well, but like I'm imagining something much more fleshed out than that. Or maybe even something where it's more of like a co-op, sort of like a couch co-op situation. I feel like couch co-op has just been served very poorly. And to be fair, it's on me for not playing more couch co-op games to some extent, right? Like I'm part of that problem, why there's not as much demand for that sort of thing. But there are a bunch of games on my Steam list right now that I've been meaning to go and play through with Chelsea. It's just, you know, it's hard to find time to do stuff like that. By the end of the day, you know, which is like 4 hours from now, when both the kids have finally been put to sleep and we've cooked and cleaned and done all the other stuff, it's like there's no mental bandwidth to play a game. All we can do is just sit there and you know, watch a show or whatever and decompress. A game is just a little bit too much commitment. So anyway, yeah, I think we're pretty much done.
What did I do? Did I do something wrong? There's the length I want it to be. Here's the length it was. So we're basically multiplying by that ratio. Here's the DDP. Doing 1 over length times the distance between them. Closest hero high P, entity high P. What did I do? Shouldn't he be much more sluggish? Much more sluggish than that? Maybe not. So let's find out what the acceleration of the hero is first of all, just to know what I think. So DDP is 1. Oh, duh. He has exactly the speed of the hero because this player speed was baked into this function. So that's why. Yeah, that's the problem, people. That's the problem right there. So yeah, so basically what I need to do is remove that. So let's go ahead and say to do, you know, pull speed out of move entity. And we'll just say he moves half the speed of the hero, because now basically everything's in terms of hero speed, which is not useful. So now he should get far away from the player and then eventually catch up, like so. And so that's fine, and everyone's fine with that. But what should also happen is if I move, there he goes. If I move far enough away, he should stop, right? And there he does. So the other thing that we need to do is he should always be moved so that his equations of motion still handle, so he doesn't stop right away like that. I don't know why I always close the app. So what we want to do too is we want to have this DDP just be nothing at first, and then it can, if there wasn't someone to follow, at least then he'll still glide. So you know he'll glide to a stop, right? Instead of stopping abruptly, right? So when I get out of range, he just kind of should taper off a little bit, and instead of stopping totally abruptly. I think that's working. Can't quite tell. I probably should have some slower equations of motion to see if he does or if he doesn't. And so this was also the pathfinding problem. You can see I can get him trapped here, right? And now he can't get to me. And so that was kind of the thing I was saying is like we're probably going to want to start adding some more advanced features so that the monsters and the familiars are smart enough to navigate obstacles on their own, because otherwise the game would be pretty stupid, I would think. All right, so got some more to-dos to do tomorrow, but for now I think that's totally fine for today's progress. And so let's go ahead and go to the Q&A since it's Q&A time. If you could please prefix your...
So I will not stick around for the Q&A today. But if anything interesting does come up, I will bring it up tomorrow. I think in yesterday's Q&A, you talked about like, Emacs versus Vim or something like that, and how he really only cares about Emacs, or he only uses Emacs because it's just what he knows. Like, he never had the opportunity really to learn Vim, and so he just got really good with Emacs, and the rest was history. And then moving the entity, he moved that out of there, but the rest of this I think looks fine. Yeah, there we go. So now he just kind of glides towards us. This is like my dog. This is like you. This is like you. Can you even see him? Yeah. It's like that guy. Won't leave me alone. All right. Well, thank you for hanging out with me on another stream of Odinmade Hero. This was a really good one. I feel like we wrote a ton of code, and it's like more interesting stuff because we're actually putting things on the screen, more things on the screen, and it just feels like the work we're doing is more impactful. We'll get to reap all the rewards of having done the spatial partitioning, and writing out that that whole system for having low and high entities. I'll probably come back around to it to make sure that's really cemented, because at this point I feel like it's going to do, and I'm sure there'll be changes that get made over time, but I feel like it's going to do as much as we could want to do. If we wanted to have like a few hundred entities on the screen at once, or tens of thousands of them dormant, whatever, like it just seems like it would work. But there is that issue that I talked about at the beginning of the stream, which I think still is very much a bug. So there's all sorts of little things I'm sure that can be improved, but it feels really good to have a stream like this where we can not run into any show-stopping bugs and actually just do the thing and have it wrapped up neatly like that. So I'll be back tomorrow to wrap up the week, where we will do something interesting, I'm sure. What is tomorrow's day looking like? Adding hit points. So we're going to add some health to our player, which is neat. You can tell the algorithm knows I've been looking at politics stuff with the election this week. It's kind of one of those things where you can't look away from it, for better or worse. So yeah, thanks for hanging out with me, and we'll be back tomorrow. See you then. Have a good rest of your night.